This is Let's Talk Energy, your go-to podcast for smart energy insights. I'm your host, Noah Brenner, and each week we're bringing you an inside look at the dynamics shaping global energy markets through in-depth conversations with our own Rystad energy experts and some special guests. In today's episode, we explore the rapidly advancing efforts to develop small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs. Nuclear energy has captured the imagination of the private sector and policymakers alike for its ability to generate firm power, unlike variable renewable sources, with no emissions, unlike natural gas or coal. SMRs have been pitched as a way to overcome the cost overruns and timeline disappointments that we've seen in conventional nuclear developments in the West in recent years, and to help meet the growing needs of power grids and behind-the-grid users, such as data centers. But to date, all the hot water generating power in the nuclear industry has come from large conventional reactors, while SMRs have generated a lot of high hopes and hot air, but only a few experimental facilities are currently online anywhere in the world. So, can SMRs compete with renewables and fossil fuels to help meet growing global power needs with clean, firm electrons? Will SMR developers solve the cost overruns and the project delays that have plagued conventional nuclear projects recently to deliver low-cost electrons on time and on budget? And finally, which countries might be poised to lead the race to develop this new source of power at a time of growing global competition for energy and digital dominance? To give us the perspective of an SMR developer, from Abilene, Texas, we're joined by Doug Robison, founder and CEO of Natura Resources, who's developing a reactor there and has plans for subsequent commercial facility in the region. Doug, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Noah. Good to meet you.
And for a global perspective on the state of SMR development and why there's such a push to develop this new source of nuclear power, we have Torres Diaz, Rystad Energy's head of power, joining us from Oslo. Carlos, welcome.
Thank you, Noah. Hello, Doug. Great being here today.
Well, gentlemen, let's talk energy. Before we get started, I want to briefly define what it is we're talking about when we say small modular reactor, or SMR. For our purposes, we're talking about reactors that are 300 megawatts or less, so that compares to conventional reactors that are more than twice that size, and they're modular, meaning that they can be made from a standard set of components in a factory and scaled up with multiple units to be assembled on site, rather than a bespoke construction project each time. Within this definition, there's a wide range of reactor sizes and technologies and development strategies that companies are pursuing around the world. Doug, that brings us nicely to your project. So let's start. Can you briefly describe Natura's project and the commercialization plans and what the status is?
So Natura Resources, we're based in Abilene, Texas. We are deploying the U.S.'s first ever liquid-fueled reactor. It is a Gen 4 technology. It's a molten salt cooled liquid-fueled technology. It's what was demonstrated at Oak Ridge in the 1960s in the molten salt reactor experiment. And we have a construction permit from Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We're building the nation's first advanced reactor. And we have currently here in Abilene, the only advanced reactor facility that's a $25 million science, engineering, and research center.
And in terms of when you're planning to be online, what's kind of the timeline you're looking at here?
Current timeline is we got the construction permit in September of 2024. So that's the approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to build the reactor. I should note there's only 2 of those that have been issued by the NRC to date. We are in the process now of signing EPC agreements. We're getting in bids for equipment. We will be constructing that reactor we already are constructing the different components of the reactor. We're a part of the Department of Energy's pilot program project that came out of one of President Trump's executive orders. So our fuel that we're using for this reactor is coming from Idaho National Lab, and our salt was allocated to us just at the end of this year. We expect the reactor to be built in 2026 and go critical either at the end of this year or the first of next year, really dependent upon how quick Idaho National Lab can process that fuel.
Carlos, I think it would be really helpful just to take a step back here and for you to help listeners understand the big picture. Why is it that we're talking about developing more power generation, in particular nuclear power generation, in the first place? And where do we see necessarily SMRs fitting into some of those efforts?
Electricity demand has been growing very strongly over the last 2 decades, driven a lot by economic development, mostly in Asia. And now we're reaching around 30,000 terawatt hours of electricity demand globally. And we're forecasting that this demand will be growing very strongly over the next 25 years, reaching close to 56,000 terawatt hours by 2050, meaning that it will be almost doubling between now and 2050. So this means that we need a lot more of new capacity to meet this increasing demand. And this will not only need to come from renewable energy resources, but also from conventional sources like nuclear and gas. So overall, we're forecasting that electricity demand, like new demand, will be mostly met with the solar power first because it's now very cheap. So we're forecasting that we will be reaching close to 15,000 gigawatts of installed capacity from solar PV by 2050. And then we will also be needing around 6,000 gigawatts of wind capacity backed up together, solar and wind, by batteries, which could also be reaching close to 6,000 gigawatts. Most of this new demand will be met with renewable sources, but then we also need something to provide stability to the grid to help meet the baseload supply. And this is where nuclear power and gas will also be playing a very important role. Today, we have around 440 gigawatts of operational conventional nuclear power capacity. And we are forecasting that this could be nuclear capacity could be reaching close to 800 gigawatts by 2050, meaning that we need to add around 400 gigawatts of additional capacity. There's around 200 gigawatts of identified projects, either under construction or planned, which then will be taking this to close to 600. But then that means that there's another 200 gigawatts of capacity that are needed in order to meet demand in the future. And this is where small modular reactors could be playing a very important role in helping meet this demand. I would also like to add, now, a lot of this demand is growing from first the industrial sector, but there's emerging sectors like the electric transport and data centers. And technology companies now are looking for reliability and stability of supply. So they have been looking at SMRs as one of these alternative sources of supply that can help meet their needs.
Doug, how does that global outlook square with what you're seeing and the conversations that you're having where you sit in Texas, certainly a hotbed for development of these data centers in particular?
If I turned the camera, we could see the first deployment of Stargate 1. That's a 1.4 gigawatt data center. Stargate 2, which is a few miles to the east, has also broken ground, another 1.4 gigawatt data center. And then we have a third 1 point something gigawatt data center about 45 miles to the north of us. So it's all right here literally in our community. The Texas, what we see in Texas, and we may address this later, is that the Texas grid is 90 gigawatts, the total grid. In 2023, the legislature put $5 billion into new generation aimed at natural gas. This session, the legislature put a $350 million fund for the Texas Nuclear Fund. I served on that task force appointed by Governor Abbott. On top of that, we have $120 million, a direct appropriation from the legislature into our demonstration reactor here in Abilene. All of that is to meet the growing demand in Texas, going from 90 gigawatts to the middle of this last legislative session here in 2025. The ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, forecast that the 90 gigawatts was going to go as high as 225 gigawatts in the next 6 years. And so that incredible increase in demand is that we need all power that we can possibly bring to bear.
Why develop SMRs? I mean, why could SMRs be the answer for providing power there?
But a couple of reasons. One is because the wind and solar that we have, and much of it is located in this part of the state, which is not near the metropolitan areas. And so then you have a transportation infrastructure issue of rising to the tens and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, creating the infrastructure to transport that power from West Texas to the metropolitan areas. The other is that the natural gas that we have, much of that is being consumed now by the data center AI industry. On top of that, the small modular reactors give the ability to deploy power exactly where it is needed near the metropolitan areas. Our demonstration reactor, because of its safety characteristics, is actually located in Abilene, Texas, in the town. It's across the street from a brand new boys and girl dormitory on the campus of Abilene Christian University. And so we have deployability, and then on top of that, we bring some other technologies such as high process heat and the ability to gather nuclear isotopes that are used for medical. So there's a lot of advantages SMR have on top of our traditional forms of energy here in Texas.
Carlos, I wanted to come to you because some of the attributes that Doug has highlighted in terms of why SMRs make sense for Texas and for his particular part of Texas are also some of the things that you're evaluating as you look at SMR projects globally. And so, talk to us a little bit about what all goes into those evaluations and how you think about which SMR projects are likely to move ahead in which parts of the world, because this is an industry where we've seen a lot of discussion, a lot of plans, and we are still kind of getting forward with that execution phase. So, Carlos, how do we think about SMR development?
There's more than 100 projects globally that are being developed, and not all of them will become commercial, depending on the maturity of the technology. So then we're looking at different aspects of these projects and evaluating them. So we're looking, for example, into the technology they're using. So if it's a proven technology, then they will be receiving a higher grade. Also, the financing, like if they have received enough financing and where this financing is coming from, if they're getting some government support, for example, as Doug has already mentioned. We're looking at if they have secured the fuel supply, the location, and then also the acceptance from the society around to be able to deploy these projects. So then based on this, we're grading all the projects around the world, and we have identified that around 1.3 gigawatts are already very likely to move ahead. There's also around 7 gigawatts that are likely, so just they still need to progress a bit further in their maturity. But then there's around 16 gigawatts of these projects that are still very speculative, given that have not progressed, for example, on their licensing, or they have not started to construct some test facilities. So we're looking into all these aspects, but like most projects are aiming to be commercially operational like from 2030s onwards. So then it's a bit of a race to see which projects mature by 2030, and probably these are the ones that are going to start seeing more progress globally.
Doug, Carlos touched on the impact of technology and that technological maturity question in project development. I don't want to get too into the weeds in nuclear technology, but I do want to understand, why did you choose the technology that you did for Natura?
Back in 2017, I made a gift to a lab that was doing molten salt research. And that led to Department of Energy hearing about the gift, hearing about the research, coming to Abilene, and then flying us to DC and saying, you need to build this reactor. Dr. Rusty Towle of the next lab at Abilene Christian University, he and his team chose molten salt technology because it had been demonstrated at Oak Ridge National Lab in the molten salt reactor experiment back in the 1960s. And that technology was deployed for about 5 years. And then the really Department of Defense moved forward with light water reactors for military purposes. So the choice was, let's pick a proven technology and then explore what it would mean to bring that up to date and actually deploy that. So that was the choice made by the next lab. I funded the research in 2017 with a gift, and then 2019 when the Department of Energy said we need you to build this reactor. That's when I came out of my retirement and stood up Natura Resources to actually deploy the demonstration reactor as well as the commercial reactors.
Carlos, how important is that maturity? As Doug said, they chose a technology that's decades old, really. In terms of, as we're looking at kind of the technological landscape, where do you kind of see the range, and how important is the technological maturity to being able to satisfy some of these other questions that are important to moving a project ahead?
There's a couple of projects that have already started test like experimental operations. There's one in Russia with like a floating unit in Siberia. There's also one in China, which is gas cooled in southeast China. So this has, for example, progressed and could be reaching a commercial phase quite soon. But then there's also like a lot of projects, as I mentioned, in the United States that still need to prove their commercial viability. There's a couple that have received some funding from the federal government, around $400 million each. This is the Tennessee Valley Authority, for example, which is located in Clinch River, and then also a project being developed by Holtec, which has the GE Vernova Hitachi technology. So we are seeing a lot of progress in many parts of the world, which could be leading to some more final investment decisions on the commercial technology soon.
How do you see the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, levelized cost of energy, of these projects stacking up against one another? What types of ranges maybe are you seeing out of those proposals? And then as well against competing energy sources, because as we said, nuclear and SMRs are not the only source that will be, being developed to meet this rapidly growing demand.
There's a lot of numbers of LCOEs, and they're like all over the place. So then it will really, we will really need to see what is the evidence providing on when it comes to economic advantages of SMRs. But if we like talk about some examples of conventional nuclear technology. For example, in China, they're claiming that they are developing some of the conventional nuclear reactors at a levelized cost of around $50 per megawatt hour, which make them one of the cheapest in the world. And in Europe, some of the reactors that are currently under development, like Hinkley Point C, is estimated to have an LCOE closer to $150 per megawatt hour, making it on the higher range of the bar. The reason China has lower costs is because they have been developing many reactors. So then this allows a lot of economies of scale and serialization of the projects, which makes it a lot cheaper. And I think this is what SMR technology is trying to replicate. Like by building in series, then you can build cheaper projects. There is very little evidence of the levelized cost of energy of SMRs. Some are claiming to be aiming for around $60 per megawatt hour, others 90. But then it's going to be within this range, maybe close to between $60 and $100 per megawatt hour. Now, if we compare this versus other technologies, like solar now is on average around $50 per megawatt hour globally, which is cheaper than most nuclear projects. But then obviously solar PV is variable, right? So if you want to provide some more stable supply from this source, then you need to add the batteries, which will be increasing the levelized cost closer to $120 per megawatt hour. Now, if we compare it to baseload supply from gas and coal plants, this has also like very wide range of costs depending on the source of the fuel and if you add the carbon pricing. So we talk about projects in the US where there's availability of cheap gas, then the levelized cost of a gas plant can be as low as maybe $60 per megawatt hour. While in Europe, where you have to import the fuel from other places, and then you, on top of that, need to add the carbon price, then you're reaching levels of close to $200 per megawatt hour. So then it depends a lot on where you're developing the projects and against what it's competing. But in general, like nuclear seems to have costs that are like attractive if you're talking about baseload supply. And if we talk again about the tech industry, which is willing to pay a premium for stability of supply and a lot of the time also that it's carbon-free power, then that's where nuclear has a very big opportunity.
Doug, if I can pry, how do you see the LCOE of your project perhaps developing? And are there some key elements or decisions that you've made to try to help keep those costs down, keep that levelized cost of energy low?
Yeah, Carlos laid that out really, really well. We have huge amount of natural gas here in Texas. In fact, the data centers that are being located in Texas are locating on natural gas pipelines. And so where we saw the announcement that came out, the middle of 2023, I believe, in the fall of that year, with Microsoft, Nucor, and Amazon, I believe maybe was the first big announcement. The indication is they were not going to use carbon. They were going to need reliability. Obviously, wind and solar cannot power data centers, and that they're going to need up to 100 gigawatts of new power for those data centers. Now, what they have done in the meanwhile is have captured whatever dormant power there may have been in the U.S. that disappeared very quickly, and then they started bringing back online some old nuclear, 3 Mile Island, for example. But now what we're seeing is they're using natural gas. And so our levelized cost of electricity, it'll be ultimately proven when we actually deploy reactors. So this is speculative at this point, but for our technology, for molten salt reactors, it is expected to be at or below the levelized cost of electricity, which Carlos said for us is somewhere in the $50 per megawatt hour, or and up to now we have peaker plants that we have to use when we have energy demand surges that can be as high as $200 per megawatt hour. So we expect to be competitive within that. But one of the real questions here in Texas and the U.S., and I would imagine around the world, but particularly in the U.S. where we're seeing data centers and AI consuming natural gas, is are they going to be able to continue that? Will they transition at some point to nuclear? And if they do, how much are they willing to pay for that energy? The economics are saying they're willing to pay a lot for that. And then in the U.S., are those new industries going to be able to connect to the grid and pass those costs on to the consumer? Or as the administration said as late as last week, they're going to have to carry their own energy costs and not do that. So there's a lot to be understood on how data centers and AI are going to deploy into the grid. Are they going to be behind the grid? Are they going to pull from natural gas reserves? Are they going to ultimately transition to nuclear? And I think that's what we're seeing is that the plan is to, at least for those industries, to transition currently from natural gas to nuclear. The projects we have here in Abilene are currently being powered by natural gas.
I think like Doug has raised an important point there, that one of the main issues, especially in the United States and Europe, where demand had been very flat and now it's starting to increase, is that there's not enough interconnection capacity to bring all the needed capacity online. So then that's also where small modular reactors are very attractive, especially to the tech industry, that they can be developed behind the meter, right? And then this can be like a shortcut in order to secure supply for their projects and not have to wait for the interconnection queue.
I want to take a bit of a step back here. I mean, in a world of greater globalization and liberalized trade, the levelized cost of energy might be the only real consideration here when looking at project development. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily the way the world is going today. And so, Doug, I guess, is it accurate to think of SMR development with the same framing as some of these discussions around AI, that it's a geopolitical race for countries to secure this technology, to prove it, to scale it? Um, and I guess, what's at stake here as you're sitting in Texas when it comes to the U.S. developing SMR technology?
Energy is the mother of all grids. You fight wars over energy. So obviously, capturing industry, having energy, not being energy reliant is hugely important. The technology we deployed in the Permian with the hydraulic fracturing ended up making the United States energy independent. You can't overstate how important that is. These new technologies in 2019, when the DOE, Department of Energy, said, Doug, we need you to build this reactor. We have to beat China. We have to beat Russia. The U.S. needs to capture this technology. It was from a national security standpoint. Now, when Governor Abbott here in Texas created the Texas Advanced Nuclear Working Group that I served on, that ended up in that legislation, the mandate there was we need to reinforce the Texas grid with more reliable power, and we want to capture this industry for Texas from an economic development standpoint. So you see both of those working in tandem: national security, securing energy technology. China, Carlos had mentioned the gas cooled reactor. They've also deployed a technology exactly like ours, a liquid fueled molten salt reactor using thorium, a different fuel source versus uranium. So we're seeing a race for technology. And Carlos, I think that the two technologies you marked, two countries you mentioned, were Russia and China. And so if the U.S. and other countries are wanting to compete globally for this new form of energy, then we know where our competition lies, which is exactly the challenge the Department of Energy laid out to us in 2019 when we started this project.
Carlos, you had mentioned particularly China and Russia as places that have deployed a couple of these small modular reactors. Which countries do you see out of that range of projects? Which countries do you see perhaps leading the race right now? And where are some signposts or specific projects maybe that you're going to be watching to understand kind of how that race is evolving?
We mentioned the main countries which are leading the race, which will be Russia and China with some experimental facilities already operational, and the US with a lot of investment and a lot of projects in the pipeline. China is commissioning a new project called Linglong this year, which will be adding a new small modular reactor. Then also Canada is pushing ahead with the Darlington, which is using GE Vernova Hitachi technology, and they're aiming to be the first commercially operational project in the Western Hemisphere. Then also in the UK, Rolls-Royce is investing a lot in nuclear technology, and they're hoping to start the development of their small modular reactor test plant, but they're also aiming to have it operational by 2035. So there's developments all around the world, but then I think this countries that I have mentioned now summarize some of the ones that are progressing the most with their projects.
I'm wondering, I guess, where are the parallels perhaps to having had a front row seat in the shale revolution, and now developing, one of these initial SMRs in the U.S. What are the similarities perhaps between SMR development and shale, and maybe are there key differences that you're looking to address as well?
The similarities are really kind of striking. In 2004, when we were unlocking hydraulic fracturing, we had to prove, we being EXL Petroleum, we had to de-risk. We had to prove the technology. We were completing wells in a way that had never been done before. And we had to prove that. We had to indicate primarily to the financial industry. At the end of the day, that's who you have to convince. And so it was by the end of our third transaction that the financial industry in Texas kind of realized what we were doing. Now, granted, we were keeping a lot of that kind of behind the curtain because of competitive reasons. When the industry realized basically we do not drill dry holes anymore, which is kind of fundamentally what happened, we had $90 billion of private equity trying to place in the Permian. When that happened, when that kind of money hits the table, you see new industries stand up. So you saw steel mills reopening in the Northeast. You had sand mines opening up in Wisconsin to provide frac sand. The only new rail being laid in the United States was being laid in the Permian to handle the industrial traffic in the Permian. And then that technology spread to the Marcellus and the Bakken and so forth and made the country energy independent. That's what we have to do in this industry, in the SMR industry. We have to de-risk it. We have to prove you can get a permit. There's only 2 companies in the US that have construction permits. If you can't get a permit, you can't build a reactor. Then you have to actually build the reactor, which is what we're doing. And then you have to be able to demonstrate how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take. When that happens, as you go down that de-risking pathway, then you begin to attract the capital. And when the capital hits the money, then everything gets stood up. Not just the industry, the SMR industry, or the technology Natura is working on, but all of the side industries that are going to supply that industry. And that's what we're seeing happening as we speak. We got our permit in 2024, and that's when the financial industry began to come to Abilene and say, okay, now we're interested in what you're doing. Let's talk about where we go next. And so those fundamental economics that I lived through in the 20 plus years ago is exactly what we're seeing happen now.
Carlos, what does success look like for SMRs globally? Is there a number of projects that you're thinking about? Okay, this is where we could hit, or an amount of capacity, I guess, that would signal that SMRs become a viable power source and an industry by, I don't know, pick a date, 2040, 2050.
Most projects are aiming to be commercially operational by 2030. So I think that probably this is a limit. If the project of the technology development stretches out to 2035, then there will be more progress on batteries, for example. And then it might make more sense to develop solar plus batteries instead of SMR technologies. So I think it's more a race of time rather than of how much capacity can be brought now.
Any parting thoughts that either of you have in terms of anything we've forgotten or anything you might want to mention?
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is the gold standard for safety in the world. And so Natura has leaned into the NRC is we want to work with the NRC because when we have that permit and when we start building a reactor like we're doing now and deploying in the middle of a city, is that people know that it's safe. And then it's just a function of at the end of the day, can you reproduce what you're doing? Do you have the supply chain? Do you have the fuel supply chain available to you? And then beyond that, are you providing economic power that people can afford? And that's what we're trying to achieve here at Natura, is each one of those. At the end of the day, we want to provide power to the world that let people out of poverty, along with the other technologies or other benefits of molten salt reactors.
We will be needing a lot of power, as it has already mentioned, in the future. And that there's not only one technology that is needed to solve this problem. We'll be relying on renewable sources of energy, but then also we will be needing other sources of energy like nuclear, both conventional SMRs and also gas to be able to meet future demand. So the more diversified the power mix is in the future, the more reliable, and then the more opportunities we'll be providing to the future generations.
Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you, Noah.
Let's recap. SMRs are rapidly gaining momentum as one way to provide clean, firm power for a world where demand on grids and off-grids is growing rapidly. There are a range of factors that will determine the success of any given SMR project, including regulatory approvals, government support, supply chain management, and securing off-takers for the power. And all of these will influence that all-important cost of power, or LCOE. Finally, SMR development is not just a question of adding power to the grid, but is also a geopolitical race among countries looking to lead in the development of what could be a large new energy industry. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Energy. This podcast is a Rystad Energy production, produced by Laura Rodriguez-Skaug and Bora Oak. Check out the show notes for further analysis on the topics we've discussed in the episode, and connect with us on social media. We're at Rystad Energy on all your major platforms. While you're there, please leave us a review, subscribe, and hit that like button. Or keep up to date with us on our website. If you'd like to send us questions or reflect on today's episode, email us directly. It's podcast@rystadenergy.com. And finally, most importantly, don't forget to join us next week for more Let's Talk Energy.